Okay, hope my screen is visible, right? So far what we discussed is Spring Boot, default starter, and web starter. With the default starter, we learned that we can use all IOC, AOP, testing, right? All such features. And when we add web, it will allow us to implement web or REST-based applications we can build, including front-end and back-end code you can write, or else you can have a plain back-end code and you can interact from any front-end using Ajax calls or REST-based calls in the microservices. We'll discuss about REST-based, okay, in the microservices concept, more about it, okay. So coming to web, what we learned is when we create a application with the web starter, default to Tomcat it will provide, and you can customize your Tomcat port by using server.port number. Available ports you know how to check. So whichever is port available, that you put under application properties file, so that you can use that port for your application. And finally you can export your application as a jar or var. End of the day you need to run by using simple java command, java-jar, and you can execute, or you can run your jar file or var file. So as embedded Tomcat is available within your jar or var, the Tomcat will start and dispatcher servlet will be instantiated, and it will execute your front end to back end, back end to front end flow as per MVC architecture. And few more things that we learned is when we create application providing us one main method class under root folder, and one application properties file, one static, and one templates folder. So basically, whichever pages you do redirect, a simple redirect using public string, whatever string you return, that it will consider as a redirect parameter. Redirect files, basically it is expecting from static folder until unless you include any template engine to your application. When we add template engine or templates, in the last example we saw when we added template, right? The default location it is considering templates. When we add theme leaf templates, default location is templates. Without templates, default location considering static. Okay. So using templates, you can construct your files here, including JSP also you can use. JSP also allowed. Okay. So for JSP, you need to include one more dependency in your application. Okay. JSP compiler we should add. Okay. I'll show you that as well on simple JSP example. Here I'll show you. Using templates, we saw how theme leaf templates we are using. Okay. Coming to simple JSP, I'll show you simple JSP. Somewhere I created one JSP example. Just a Give me a minute, just checking what it is. Let me check. Control H, JSP, start up, start. Yeah, I think this is the one. Okay, so it is under EMS web. Okay, yeah. So in this EMS web, to use JSPs, right? In addition to this, I created something like WebINF. How we will get it in traditional web application. I hope you can use your custom folders also. But yeah, if you see this source main, yeah, one web app inside web app, like one JSP folder created, like our traditional web application. Maybe this is not really required, what I believe, but yeah, you can try in both the ways also. So like traditional application here, one more web app folder created under web app webinf. Under webinf, a simple JSP file created. You know how JSP will work, right? Under JSP page, we have built-in objects, 8 or 9 objects available. Request object, response object, session object, context object. Like that, you have multiple built-in objects that you can use, and as well as expressions also it will have. So a simple JSP page, some text, and one simple expression. Under that expression, just printing a name. Okay, follow something and name. Okay, maybe here you can open in this editor also. Okay, how it is working to use JSPs along with our web dependency. Yeah, Jasper added here, Tomcat embedded Jasper. So maybe this is a compiler you can consider. JSP code will be converted into servlets code in the backend. Okay, so to do that conversion, this Jasper dependencies are required to your application. End of the day, this hello JSP will be converted into one servlet class that internally Jasper will take care. So you need to add one more dependency here, Jasper, okay, along with your web starter when you want to use JSPs. When we want to use theme leaf dependency. Just if you want to go with plain HTML, web starter itself is it. Okay. So how it is working? So here I have simple hello controller. a simple controller. Request mapping is simple hello. So when there is a hello, I'm adding output into model object. You know model and view how it works. When you keep something here, it is putting into a map. Indirectly, it is adding into your request scope. So into request scope using this key, this value is getting added here. And finally returning hello, which is the output page. So the hello output page is rendering from this location whereby enough JSP. Under JSP the suffix is .jsp. Maybe if you want to use templates, you may give templates location or static location here. I hope it will consider whichever location you give, because we are passing the prefix and suffixes here. Okay, maybe you can direct it. And the port number is 8085. So now see, when I click say hello, it should be returning JSP page. Running as Spring Boot app. It is getting started. New window. Localhost 8085. Say hello. Yeah, I submitted say hello action and getting output hello Naveen. So whatever name I have there. In case if I submit a name as a request parameter, with the same name I'll get result. But end of the day, the output I can able to consume with JSP. You know, many of you are aware of JSPs, how comfortable writing Java code in JSP, right? We are so much comfortable writing Java code. Dynamic pages if you want to create, if you are not aware of templates or if you are not good with HTML, you want to use JSPs, right? So then you can use JSP also, no problem. Finally, JSP will be converted as a servlet and your output will be rendered from that servlet only. But for us, it looks like a simple web page. So in this page, you can include your front end code, back end code, everything, right? You can keep HTML, CSS, Java code, everything together into JSP and you can make it dynamic. So this name, if it want print like a heading, if you want to apply style, right? Anything we can apply that will reflect on our page, right? So JSP, when we do like this, it will be converted into servlet. From servlet, this name dynamically it will read from request to scope and it will be appended here. And this complete statements it will return you as a out.println from servlet. So that is what we see as a output here. Finally, simple writing JSP code is simple. So we can use all JSP expressions here, right? JSP expressions, all the JSP tags that we have, right? We can use them. Expression tags, declaration tags, right? You can use all of them to write your JSP code. So this is also one possible way to create your web pages. Okay. So we can create web pages using simple HTML, using templates, using JSPs also. Okay. Everything is allowed. Anything is allowed here. I'm just shutting down. Now let's explore about another dependencies. We will do anyway. Okay. Web application will continue. We'll learn more about a database now. Okay. We understand basic, default starter and web starter with the built-in Tomcat, the JSP. all. Okay. Okay. Now we will use Spring JDBC. Okay. Spring Boot JDBC dependency we have. We'll see how it works. Okay. Spring JDBC starter. Spring JDBC starter. Okay. So for JDBC operations, we learned from basic Spring. From Spring framework, we learned we can use Spring with, we can create our application, right? Spring with simple JDBC using data source, using connection pooling. You can create JDBC code, Spring and your data source, and with the JDBC, or you can use Spring with the data source and JDBC template. Using JDBC template also you can implement JDBC template or named parameter JDBC template. Okay, multiple options we have: Spring JDBC template or named parameter template code you can write, or else you can use simple plain JDBC code. Now coming to here, okay, Spring Boot, when you add Spring data dependency, by default this data source will be provided. Okay, default data source will be provided to you, and default JDBC template will be provided to you. JDBC template will be provided to you. So these two will be coming to you as a defaults via default configuration classes, right? These will be by default provided to you, like how Tomcat is provided in web dependency, right? When you use Spring Boot, when you use Spring Boot with JDBC dependency, okay? When you add Spring Boot starter JDBC dependency, okay, the starter is Spring Boot starter JDBC. When you add this, right, by default this starter is going to provide, by default this starter is going to provide, it will be provide, it will be providing default data source to you and default JDBC template to you, which means it will create for you, it will create one connection pool and as well as JDBC template. Wherever you want in your classes you can auto add them. All you need to do is when you add this JDBC starter, right, in your application properties file, in your application properties file, right, under application properties file, you need to add your connection strings. You need to pass your connection string. You need to pass your connection string, right? Using data source prefix string dot data source dot URL, username, passwords you need to add here. That's it. Your database URL, username, passwords when you add along with your jar file, right? If you are connecting with Arkel dependency, MySQL dependencies, when you add, by default it will provide you a connection pool. Hikari connection pool by default it will create. In case if you want particular number of connections, as you know your database up to, you know, how much extent connections it can provide, how many maximum connections it can provide, right? You can keep that connection size also here, data source connection pool size, so that it will initialize that many connections to you. So that all you can set up under your properties file. Simple properties you need to configure. That's it. A default data source will be provided to you, and a JDBC template also provided to you. You need not to surprise when you add these properties how data source is creating. You know how to create data source using at the rate configuration at the rate bean. We created it using basic data source, combo pool data source, Hikari data source. We did ourselves. The same thing it is doing here. Okay, so need not to surprise. So a default a data source class executing behind the scene, and JDBC template object also creating behind the scene. So you can use them wherever you want, right? In your DO classes, right? What all you can do in your DO classes while using Spring JDBC under your DO classes. If you want to use plain JDBC code, you can auto wire. You can auto wire data source object, or if you want to use JDBC kind of code, you can auto wire JDBC template. Spring JDBC, if you want to use, you can use JDBC template. Or if you want to use plain JDBC, you can use data source. Both you can auto wire. Automatically that default created objects will be auto wired into your DO classes. Excuse me. So let's see, add and see how it is working. Okay, just create a project. Create a Spring Starter project. Spring Starter project. Okay. So yeah, simple JDBC, Spring JDBC, com.rbu.ems or anything. Next, um, just I'm adding Oracle dependency. You can try with Oracle or MySQL, anything. Okay. One Oracle driver I'm adding, and JDBC. Search JDBC. Okay. So here you can see Spring Data JDBC. One dependency we have Spring Data JDBC. Spring Data JDBC. Finish. Spring Data JDBC. Once I add, I need to add connection properties. Let me execute it. Just added a default starter, and for every example, right, which you are practicing, just add default starters and execute them and see the logs, what error messages it is giving, so that we can learn from messages also, right, which is generating. Simple JDBC created. With Spring Starter Data JDBC and Oracle dependency here. Now I'm not doing anything, just start it as a Spring Boot app. Even this is not a web application to change the port. A simple standalone project. Spring is started. Now default error we are getting, failed to configure data source. So it is telling that internally a default configuration class is trying to executing, and it is expecting properties from us: URL, username, passwords. Considering following, fail to determine suitable driver class. It is saying consider the following. If you want embedded database H2 or HSQL or Derby, please put it in the class path. It is saying as you did not put any database username, URL, passwords, maybe for H2 case or Derby in-memory database cases, maybe it is saying I'll consider you are using default H2, there is no username or password required, so that I'll connect with them. It is saying at least you need to include that jar in your class path. If you have database settings to loaded from a particular profile, maybe you need to activate that profile. And one more suggestion, it is saying maybe you kept it in some other properties file. We know, right, multiple properties files we can use. It is saying maybe you must forget the profile name, just give that profile at least. It is saying no profiles are currently activated. Maybe it is saying maybe you have another properties file, maybe dev profile, sit profile, like profiles we created, right? Multiple properties files, you guys recollect, right? So maybe it is saying maybe your properties you might have in a different properties file, give that profile name at least. It is saying okay. So if you can add H2 database, it can create H2 database connection pool directly without any username passwords. Okay, but we added rkill dependency, right? So as rkill driver class is getting loaded, you need to give that rkill database properties here, data source properties. Here we need to pass. If you search with the data source, right, you will see multiple properties. Data source properties, data source URL, data source name, username, password. Likewise, you will get multiple properties. JDBC colon, Crackle colon, thin colon at the rate localhost 1521 colon x. Data source URL. Hmm. So as it said, created only data source URL, then starting. Unsatisfied dependency. Creating a bean with the JDBC mapping context defined in the class path. JDBC repositories auto configuration class is getting executed. So this is the class by default. A auto configuration class is getting executed. Maybe you can explore this class. Okay. So in this class, it is unable to create your connection pool. Failed. JDBC creating failed dialect throw exception, failed to obtain database connection. It is saying failed to get the connection. So this is the RKill message: invalid username or password. Something by default it is trying to use, but it won't allow, right? My database will not allow. It need username and password. So along with URL, you need to put username and password. Data source dot username system password admin. This is our database username password. So now I given the URL and exact username password. Now run it. Now what happened? Acha, wrong password. Admin. Okay, maybe the same it must have given username password. fail. Yeah, now see, I given just data source URL, username, password, and read this message. Okay, starting application, no active profile, means with the default profile only we are running. Bootstrapping Spring data source repositories in default mode. Finished Spring data repository scanning. Just a minute. So finally, Hikari pool getting started. This is the default connection pool that is being used here. So one Hikari connection pool object is getting created, adding connections from Arkill, which connection it is using, T4. And maybe if you want to increase that connection pool size, you can increase it. You can give options, Hikari connection pool options you can see here. Search with Hikari password, username, pool name, maximum pool size. I'm just trying with 500. Hmm. Maybe it is getting 500 maximum pool and it is shutting down. Okay. Now just created a Spring Boot project with the Oracle dependency and Spring Boot JDBC dependency and added one URL, username, password. Even I'm not telling which is my driver class. As I added Arkill in my class path, from this URL it is recognizing your dialect, like in your Hibernate. When you add this, it is recognizing that okay, he is using Arkill, so that I need to load Arkill driver if it is available in class path. So it will definitely expect your Arkill jar file here in this class path. So under Maven dependencies, you can see here when I added nothing, right? The Spring data JDBC we added. So see how many jars getting added here. Spring Boot Starter JDBC, Hikari JDBC, Data JDBC, Relationals, and your default AOP IOC libraries. And in class path we have Arkill 11 jar file also. So that's where it is getting loaded. Okay. Now if you want to do any JDBC code, you can write. If you want to write any JDBC code, let's say, okay, um, here itself, right, in the main class itself, or create any other class. A simple DAO class I'll create here, or you can create package also. You know how to play with it. Student DAO. In this DAO class, I can auto-wire data source. Repository class, auto-wire data source. Okay, how I can auto-wire data source? It is creating Hikari data source object, right? It is Hikari data source. Object is Hikari data source, but what I am auto-wiring is data source. So all data source implementations, okay? Imagine anything in Java, whichever data sources you came across, Apache given, C3P0 given, Hikari, WebLogic, JBoss, whoever provide data source, all those data source classes are implementations of this interface only. Okay, so Java provided interface and many vendors given implementations. One of the vendor is Hikari, given Hikari data source implementation. So in Java, it is possible to pass any implementation object into its parent. So that is what we are doing here. Into data source, I'm auto wiring it. Or else maybe you can, if you want to put Hikari data source only, you can put here. Okay, but keeping data source is the best way of dealing with this application, because in future if you change from Hikari to your required data source type, then again you need to change your code also here. So we learned, right, runtime polymorphism we can achieve by keeping interfaces here and implementation object injecting, right? So now in this auto wired, it will inject Hikari data source object and you can use it. Public void print students data. Using this data source, you can get a connection. Okay, now using this connection, you can fetch any data. Let's connect with the Arkle and see. Okay, I have ID name email address in this table. I'll just do simple select on this table. Connection dot create statement. Statement dot execute query for a select operation. Select star from experts. It gives us a result set object. We can iterate over through result set and we can see the data here. While rs dot next system dot out dot println id rs dot get int of column index 1 name. Email and address. rs dot get string of 4. Yeah, so it will print all the records which are we have. rs dot close statement dot close connection dot close. Now get this DAO application context object as it will return. You can get application context dot get bean of your student DAO. Print to student data. We got the data here. As we have 4 records, these 4 records we are able to fetch in here. Okay. So what we learned from this example is when we add Spring Data JDBC dependency with data source URL username password properties, it is creating one Hikari connection pool object, and you can auto wire that connection pool anywhere within your application, and you can use it for your JDBC operations. This is one way. And by default your JDBC template also getting created here. The advanced Spring JDBC, if you want to use Spring DAO with JDBC, here you can auto wire JDBC template. So default JDBC template class will be auto wired here. Will be auto wired. So you can use this JDBC template to do all this stuff. I want to select records. Okay, JDBC template dot. We have a method, right, to get the data. Query for method. Query for list. If I give this as an input, it will give list of map objects. We know, right? It will give list of map objects. I need not to write this much JDBC code. Just I can write for each list I'll get a map object. Your column name it will give as a string. List of map objects. Okay. So for each list you will be getting a map object. Then get data from map. Map dot get of, give your column key here. That's it. ID, name, email, and address. No statements, no connections. Close. A simple query for list and iterate it. That's it. Job is done. Get this object and print to data. Right? I'm not doing anything from property side or from configurations. Just auto write JDBC template and just focusing on my code only. Now instead of this, I'll be getting JDBC bean, which is auto-wired with JDBC template. Okay. So using template class, if I do print to data, same thing is happening. Right? I'm getting data here. Maybe in a single row it is printing. You can break it. System.out.println. Here. So we are getting data, right? Using JDBC template also. So the default connection pool you can auto-wire, and default JDBC template also you can auto-wire. If you auto-wire default JDBC template, it will give you the template to you, and internally this template will use that data source only again. Right? JDBC template will not work without any connection. So how internally it get connections from the default data source only. Internally, it is creating your data source object as well as JDBC template object. You can imagine like this. There is a class which is executing JDBC configuration class. JDBC configuration class with @configuration, a default class executing internally, right? Public data source, create a data source with @being. Here it is creating the connection pool. Hikari connection pool object is getting created, and that connection pool is returning to you, as well as one more being create JDBC template into JDBC template. Right, JDBC template dot set data source also happening here, and it is passing your data source create ds. So this data source is passing here. Finally, it is creating your JDBC template also. So this is the configuration class which is internally executed. This is how your configuration class internally it is getting created and executed. So that's the reason you are able to getting the default connection pool and as well as a JDBC template. This we did before, right? In J simple Spring, we have done this job, but in Spring Boot, it is doing by default, creating data source and creating JDBC templates. All what you need to do is in your DO classes, you can auto wire either your data source or JDBC template, and you can perform the required CRUD operations, whichever you want. Okay. Same way we can use data Spring data also JPA. Okay, Spring data JPA we will see tomorrow with the defaults. Okay, what defaults it will provide and how we can use it. Okay, then we will do an end-to-end example. Okay, is that clear? Yeah.